This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jackie O and you're listening to Militantly Mixed.
Yo, this is Rashani from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
I would like to acknowledge that the Militantly Mixed podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Chumash and the Tongva people, and I wish to pay my respects to the people of those nations, both past and present.
Hey y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Charmaine, aka Mixed Girl Maine, the busiest, mixed race, bisexual, polyamorous, atheist, comic book nerd, cat mom, mask making, comic book store co-owning, shout out GulfCoastCosmos.com, podcaster in this podcasting game. This is episode 114, and it is the second to last episode before I go on my next mental health hiatus. I was going to be doing this in December, but as I've mentioned last week, I've been dealing with vertigo for the last 3 weeks, and I'm finally seeing doctors. I know what my plan is to try to resolve this current wave. So it just makes more sense to take my break now so that I can focus on this health issue and get this under control, and then come back strong the first week of December, which also happens to be my birthday. So we'll come back for the December 1st episode, which will be my birthday episode. My birthday is on December 3rd. So I was going to have this be the last episode, but I'm actually going to extend it until November 3rd episode because this weekend I got a chance to speak with Gina, the host of the Mixed in the Six podcast, which is based out of Toronto. And they are coming back for their second season the first week of November. So I want to give y'all a chance to get to know Gina a little bit, and maybe hopefully y'all will check out her podcast as well. When I came into interest in podcasting, I was listening to all of the true crime podcasts and all of the comedy podcasts I could find. I also want mixed podcasts to be like that too. That is not just Militantly Mixed that you listen to, but you're listening to Some Kind of Brown. You're listening to Mixed in the Six. Let's see what else is out there. Some that I haven't checked out yet. I know there's one called Biracial Unicorns. I think there's one called Mixed apostrophe, like MIX apostrophe D. But there's more and more of them popping up. So continue to do your searches so you can see that there are multiple things out there because, you know, we want to hear all the voices. We want to hear multiple perspectives and mixedness. And so next week, you'll get a chance to get to know Gina a little bit and hear about Mixed in the Six. So then after that, that'll be the last episode before I go on my break, and then I'll come back on December 1st. I'll still be available on social media, though, and I will, of course, be in the social distancing hangouts and things. I just won't be releasing new episodes. I may release some reruns as long as it's not a whole lot of extra work for me to get it up. I just want to be able to take a break from all the podcasts, Blurred Comics included, and get this health thing under control. And then I'll come back hopefully to full health in December. But because I'm taking the break in November, a couple of things that I want to do is I want to continue to acknowledge that the Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month is October 15th through November 15th. So we're actually still in it. I did put out a couple calls, to folks, but I didn't manage to get any guests that are doing work in terms of, you know, lifting up or raising awareness for Hispanic and Latinx Heritage Month. So I failed this year to be able to do that. I'll start doing the work for it well in advance next year. And of course, anytime throughout the year, hopefully I can manage to tap into the groups that are doing work in that area because I don't actually have an access point at present. But I still want to acknowledge the Heritage Month. I know that many of our listeners are also mixed with Hispanic and or Latinx heritage. So I want to be celebrating y'all and hopefully finding guests that will give you more access to the cultures and heritages that you come from as well. So I'll try to get ahead of it for next year, but it just didn't work out this year. That also being said, November is the Native American and or Indigenous Peoples Heritage Month, depending on which term is more meaningful to you. Previous to 2019, it wasn't an official Heritage Month. It was made official in the US last year. But before that, and for many years before that, it was always the month in which we would acknowledge Red November, which was the missing and murdered Indigenous women's, girls, and Two-Spirit month, where that was where a lot of work was done in terms of raising awareness. And for those of you that may not be aware, there is this hashtag MMIWG, the number 2S. And that is a hashtag for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. Because 4 out of 5 of Native women are affected by violence daily in this land that is currently occupied as the United States. Homicide towards women, girls, and Two-Spirit people are the 3rd highest cause of death between people that are 10 to 24 years old. And it's the 5th leading cause of death for Native women and Two-Spirit people that are between the ages of 25 and 34. And these are statistics that come from the Center of Disease Control, Homicide Prevention. The problem is that these murders, and I don't know if kidnapping would be the right term, go so unnoticed in American media because Indigenous people are discounted here. Because some of the nations are sovereign, they don't seem to garner the attention of our media. And for those whose sovereignty has been stripped from them, they don't have the same level of citizen rights as Americans as other Americans do. And so the violent crimes that are enacted against them seem to go unnoticed in the greater population. So it's been for many years that missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Awareness Month was happening in November already. It's also referred to sometimes as Red November. I became aware of it roughly 2 years ago. And then last year got more involved, listened more, started to follow more Indigenous social media accounts so that I would become more aware, so that it would be more in my view. The statistics and the numbers are horrific. And I don't want to let that pass me without being able to either assist in raising awareness and or contributing in some way, shape, or form to help. So some of you may know I also have a side business, masksbymane.com. And for that side business, I make masks, and every month I take a portion of the proceeds and donate it to various COVID relief funds. After the death of Chadwick Boseman, I also started to donate the proceeds from my Black Panther masks to St. Jude's Children's Hospital for cancer research, because that was an organization that he was heavily involved in before he died of colon cancer himself. This month, I would like to contribute a portion of the proceeds to the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit organization, the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. They do have a COVID relief fund, which I guess money is routed through the main donation tab. So that's where I'm going to be focusing the October and November donations from Mass by Maine. I'm going to put some links in the show notes for y'all in case you would like to contribute as well, because I do think it is important to use whatever platforms we have to raise awareness on issues such as this. You may notice that at the beginning of every episode of Militantly Mixed, during the opening credits, I acknowledge that Militantly Mixed is recorded on the traditional lands of the Chumash and the Tongva people. The reason why I do that is last year when I was at the Geek Girl Con in Seattle, Washington, they did that ahead of every panel. It really affected me in this idea of like knowing what existed before you, understanding our history, things like that. So I took it to heart and I looked up on the Native Lands website, what land am I currently occupying, so that I can start to incorporate that as well. Because I think remembering what happened before is important, and hopefully it does help us prevent doing it again. Although there are actually things that we can be doing now that while we may not be able to change things back to the way they were, we can at least try to improve the situation as it currently stands. I don't believe in stripping the sovereignty from the Indigenous nations. I know that is happening. I do think that the recent judgment from the Supreme Court that has granted ownership of the territory in Oklahoma to the Creek Nation there is also a major step towards improving, I don't know really how to say it, I guess, allowing for their sovereignty to actually stay intact, that they can govern their own criminal cases and things like that is important. So with this being Native American and or Indigenous Peoples Heritage Month, depending on which term is more acceptable for you, I just want to make sure that I acknowledge it now, since I won't be able to do that during my break in episode form. And just encourage you to continue to seek out following social media accounts that are from groups that you may not be a member from, so that you can also gain awareness of what's happening to other communities. It's easy to live in a bottle and only understand the oppression that you're experiencing. But the oppression that affects any of us individually as groups ultimately will spill out into our groups as well. So do your best to follow more accounts of Latinx folks, of Black folks, of Asian folks, of Native Indigenous folks, so that you can gain awareness of what they're experiencing as well. That is how I started to become more aware of the crimes against Indigenous women and Two-Spirit and girls. And I hope to continue to have awareness of what's happening, so that I can find ways from where I'm at to contribute positively in some way, shape, or form. Let's see. Before we get into today's episode, a few things. Just a reminder about the transcripts. I don't know how many people have had a chance to start reviewing those, but if you do go to militantlymixed.com and click on the transcripts tab, you will be routed to the Podscribe page that actually has transcripts from all episodes of Militantly Mixed dating back to episode 20. I haven't resolved. It's going to be probably months until I'm able to resolve that issue with iTunes about them getting episodes 0 through 19 back up, so that we can get the transcripts for those as well. But you can subscribe to the transcripts so they drop into your email box every week, or you can just go to the militantlymixed.com and click on the transcripts tabs to get access to them if that is something that you need. And I will do my best to try to keep them as clean as possible going forward, and then work slowly on trying to clean up the transcripts from the past. Sometimes names are misspelled, or words are heard incorrectly, or transcribed incorrectly and things like that. So I'll do my best to keep it clean going forward and fix what I can in the back when I have time. And also the annual Be Your Mixed Ass Self fundraiser t-shirt is available in the Teespring shop. So you can go to militantlymixed.com and click on the Teespring tab to get access to the Militantly Mixed logo tees and coffee mugs and tote bags, but also the Be Your Mixed Ass Self t-shirt, the Mixed and Hella Black t-shirt. And I realize my Mixed AF t-shirt seems to have disappeared, so I'm going to get that back up there as well. I do have a couple other slogans I need to throw up that I've been not able to get done, but this is the annual fundraiser t-shirt. It is a collector's item because you can get one every year, and it only lasts until November 30th. Once November 30th is gone, so is that t-shirt, and you'll just have to wait to next year to get the new design for next year. If you were able to pick up last year's and this year's, then you will currently have a collection. Which I'm about. So I've seen some people have purchased them already. It is available till November 30th. So get those orders in so that you can start posting those pics on Instagram. And just be sure that if you do hashtag it Be Your Mixed Ass Self or Militantly Mixed, that you capitalize the word, every word in the hashtag, so that people that do text to audio can actually understand what the hashtags are as well. And let's see what else before we get into today's episode. I guess we only have about 10 more days left in the U.S. election, so I know y'all are tired of hearing about it. I am tired of hearing about it. And if you're one of our international listeners, I'm sure you're tired about hearing about American politics all the time. But if you have had a chance to register to vote, please make sure that you do so if you can. If you were able to do mail-in ballots for, that obviously is a great option for maintaining our safety during this time of COVID. But if you weren't able to, and you are planning on voting in person, hopefully you're able to arrange to vote early in your area, depending on what is available on your state, so that you can do it when the lines aren't too long, hopefully, and you can remain safe and socially distanced. This is a very important time to be voting. And I know that not all listeners of this show are necessarily in the same parties or anything like that. But I do at least believe that if you listen to the show, if you have any awareness of your mixed identity and your understanding of the impact against people of color in general, that while neither choice is ideal right now, we can't continue on with the way that we have things. We just can't. it's too dangerous. We're seeing the end of our country if we continue on with the way things are going. Not that that means that if the tables switch that it'll get instantly better. It won't for many years because there's a lot of damage to repair over the last 4 years. So voting is important. Your local elections are also important. The presidential election is extremely important right now. So if you're able to vote, please do. Please do. All right. Dang, these intros, I swear, I always have too much stuff to talk about. All right, so this week's guest is Sidra. And before I get into talking about this week's episode, I have to apologize to Sidra because her episode was supposed to air 2 weeks ago, but that was kind of the start of my vertigo, and I just was not able to finish editing the episode. And then last week, of course, the what went up was the audio from the previous week's live stream, which is kind of now how I do things. So I'm putting this episode here and apologizing to Sidra. Thank you for your patience since we did have an expected date already and I had to bypass that. Sidra and I met in a social group on Facebook related to Japanese American heritage. Sometimes that's a great place. Sometimes it's not the safest place for the mixed folks in the group. And that is how we interacted. She had made a post, which she's going to talk about. And the responses from people were pretty wild. And because of that, I reached out to her so that we can kind of talk about that experience and then also get to know her as well and welcome another cousin into the community. So since this intro is already so long, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our latest cousin to the Militantly Mixed family, Sidra. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell everybody about you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Sidra Kaluska. I am of mixed backgrounds. I am Polish with maybe a touch of Russian on my dad's side. And I am Japanese Canadian on my mom's side. And she's full-blooded Japanese, but Canadian.
Born in Canada, not like, is she, what generation?
She's third generation. Zero language. My grandparents went through the internments, and that just like put a huge damper on so much of the culture. So growing up, I was pretty much cut out of all of the culture.
Right.
How deep do you want me to get into this?
This is your story. You could get all the way into it. So were they from American internment, or was Canada doing that also?
Canada did the same thing.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So they basically went roughly on the same schedule line that the US did. I don't know a whole bunch about my mom's side of the family, but I know I have relatives on the East and the West Coast. So I know some of her family were farmers, and they lost their entire farm.
Right.
They were shipped off to some farm in the middle of nowhere. Sections of Canada did it differently than the U.S. Like the U.S. had specific camps that they shipped people off to. Mm-hmm. I don't know about my grandfather's side, but my mom's family was sent to, it's either a turkey or a sugar beet farm. And they were it was in the middle of winter. They were basically put in a shed. And I interviewed my grandmother once when I was maybe in the 4th grade, and she was 6 when they went in, and she blocked a lot of that.
Right.
And remembering that, like they could see slats, like holes through the barn wall, because it wasn't even a proper any kind of living conditions. And this is Canada in the middle of winter.
Oh my gosh.
And I did meet one cousin on that side of the family once who had been doing some family research, and apparently somebody on that side was even born in
the camp
period, and they actually hid her because they were taking babies away.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just kind of very complicated,
right?
To say the least about that period. I think my grandfather decided to work on the railroad instead of going into the camps because he was old enough to do that. So a lot of my cultural heritage, I feel like, was really squashed out during that period. And
it does make sense. And I get upset about like how Japanese come to other places and then just fully assimilate. But when you think about the history as to why, the difference between you and I is my grandmother came during the Korean War era, war brides. So she didn't have that part of like internment and loss of culture. It was really just like the military was like, you will be white now, and they basically like they put her in American domesticity classes and taught her how to be. Yeah. Like it's a whole thing. And so like to try to get this woman to teach us Japanese, it was always a secret because she was always afraid that they would send her back. So like in that case, it's a different kind of squashing of culture, but both the internment generation and anybody that emigrated afterwards, I think, are a product of this, like just assimilate. And in that case, we feel we have these faces and these skin tones and this hair, and we're just like, but I want to connect.
What do we do with this?
What do we do with it? Exactly. So did you grow up here in the States though, or did you grow up in?
Yeah, I grew up here in the States. So my dad was from Michigan, and complicated backgrounds for him. Just kind of a complicated backgrounds all the way around. I was born around 20 minutes from where I live now. So I'm from the New River Valley area of Virginia, up in the foothills. So, wow. I don't even know where to get started in some place.
Well, we can, if you want to, we can kind of talk about why we connected, and then if you want, you can jump back in.
Sure. So our connection was through, I found a post, and I don't want to get too much into where it came from, that referred to different color groups and one of the color groups that was being welcomed was, quote, yellow. And that was being used in a positive type of thing. It wasn't necessarily meant to be derogatory, but it's just like, I'm not yellow.
Yeah, yellow is loaded.
That's just a very historically derogatory term. And the conversation that I brought up and then we got kind of wrapped up in was kind of understanding how offensive other people of Japanese heritage found the term yellow. And I am honestly quite flabbergasted that most of the people that were responding to this had absolutely no problem with being referred to as yellow or being called yellow. I'm not entirely sure, but kind of doing mile digging, just like looking at profile pictures essentially. And, just
for like age category and things like that.
Yeah. It's like, okay, most of them are older opposed to more in our age range.
Right.
And something that I had come to realize last year, right around this time, was that there's also kind of a generational divide with the term Oriental.
Right. Like this has come up a few times on my show.
Like, if you refer to me as Oriental, that's a big no-no.
Right.
But
it's a rug or a dish, not a person.
Walk up to grandma might be okay with that. So kind of like a reclassification, because what may have been appropriate at one time isn't really appropriate now.
Right.
And kind of trying, some of the people in the group were trying to draw the association between black and white, and like white and black are used derogatory. Like, can't think of a whole bunch of instances where white is per se, but
yeah, not really.
A little bit more like self-classification. But then the African American movement really latched onto the Black terminology and self-owned it. I don't think translated.
I don't think it translates to yellow quite as much, but specifically with Blackness. And I am the kind of mixed Black person that identifies as Black, not African American, because African American doesn't fit. I don't know if my ancestors have been here for 400 years or 150 years. All I know is that they were enslaved. And as a result, I have a disconnect to where my people come from. And if not for a DNA test, I wouldn't know that they specifically came from, 3 tribes in Gabon. That was something I had to pay for, like a lot of money. Like I had to pay a lot of money to find out where in Africa my ancestry comes from. So for me, the African American never sat well, and it was becoming really popular when I was coming of age. So that 12 to 14 age range was about the time that Ebonics was being discussed. African American as a term was coming up. And for me, Black made sense because it was how I understood being an American descendant of enslaved people versus being from Africa. Like I had no bridge to Africa. So Black for me is empowering and is very comfortable. I'm born in the late 70s. So I'm kind of a product of the end of the Black Panther movement and those kind of, racially service to community militancy and things like that. So for me, Black made sense. White is so generic. Like, how do you feel anything about this? Like for me, my white comes from, on my mom's side, the white is West Virginia, Appalachian folk. And my, right? And I even say Appalachian right. I learned last year how to say it. And then my dad's mother is from England. So my white that I grew up with was British. I didn't have American whiteness. My grandfather was long gone by then. So I feel nothing about the term white. Like it has no effect on me, whereas Black raises me up. Yellow, it's a mixed bag of when it's okay and when it's not. In the personal, small collective group of like mixed Japanese, when we're having a conversation, it's fine to me. It doesn't bother me. I also like the color combination of black, white, and yellow, and I make a joke about it because it reflects me. But I don't go around the world letting people call me yellow. Like that's not really what happens. So when I see it, I always have to take a step back and be like, all right, who is the creator of this content? Yeah. And then go from there, What bothers me is when people do, and because it's probably searchable, I won't mention it unless you want to mention it. But the particular thing that you posted, it listed black, white, yellow, and other colors that have nothing to do with race and skin tone. That's where I get hung up. I don't care if you're black, white, yellow, or green. Well, there's no green people, so let's calm down. And then I say that thinking, well, there's no yellow people really either. Mm-hmm. So I can see why it caused some of the chaos it did. You said you found there was a lot of older people that weren't as bothered by it.
Older people. There was one person, there was only one person that I actually somewhat knew who was responding to this. Everyone else was complete strangers to me, which is fine because that's kind of part of what the group is to kind of connect with the Japanese culture that you have or the Japanese culture that you have been denied with, right. Which is my case. So it has been very enlightening for me. I picked up on cooking and some other things. But yeah, for the most part, it was definitely older. And there was one person who was like, I see nothing wrong with the term yellow, but include brown because I'm Filipino. And I'm like,
oh, that's funny because it's Asian. Well, okay. No, there's something to that. There are Filipinos that do refer to themselves as brown, where that's not and South Asians. It's not common for East and Northern Asians to consider themselves brown, though. There's something there.
It's I prefer to be called brown than yellow, but is it really necessary to bring it up in the first place?
Right.
So
I guess it kind of has to do with the kind of community. Like I'm just now starting to embrace using the term brown more frequently as a thing of just I'm struggling with the term POC right now with people of color because it still centers whiteness. And I'm frustrated by how our language only has words that remind us white people exist and that we're not white, even if we're mixed with white. Like, you know, I'm really struggling. Yes. I'm struggling with it. I'm trying to use brown to embrace like I'm brown, you know, like, and it's more accurate, more closely related to the actual coloring that I might have versus, although right now in this lighting, I'm kind of looking a little bit yellow. But I'm really struggling with it. Like, I don't know how important it is that we use colors as the way that we describe ourselves. And yet I don't want to lose black. So because I don't want to lose black, I'm trying to find ways of understanding yellow, brown, white. I mean, I actually even saw someone say peach power on a group once, and I was just like, ooh, okay. So that was a thing. But there are terms of like taking it back, which is why I want to kind of understand the origin of this thing that you posted. Were they white people attempting allyship with this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's why it's so itchy. Like that's why it's so uncomfortable, because it just doesn't seem like something that a brown person would
like
do.
It's like we are community. It's community as is. You don't need to dissect the salad of our community into components to say that everyone can come in.
Like, is it more important that you're all Virginians from the River Valley? Was it
River
Valley area, or is it more important that there are some of you are white and some of you are black and some of you are yellow?
Yeah, I don't know. It is a very, very white community for sure. And like the community that I grew up in was by far even whiter. Like I'm from Floyd County, and I like to joke about our population that we have more cows than people.
Oh, okay.
And our landmark, and everyone knows exactly what you're talking about when you say it. The stoplight. We have one stoplight in the county, which is in the middle of the town, which is you can drive from one side of the town to the other in less than 10 minutes. It's just like, don't blink because you left the town limits in that time frame. So It's a very, very small town. My high school graduating class had 132 people in it. I think there were 3 or 4 Asians, maybe. We were all of mixed backgrounds, various mixed backgrounds. So I'm Japanese. There was one other person that had some Japanese, had Filipino. There might have been another person that I'm not sure about. But in general, it was very, very, very white.
Right.
And
what about Latinx or Black folks? Was there any?
We had, I think we had 2 in my grade, and one of them transferred out of my school to another school. So it was like, no, we have 1. And one Mexican in our class too. We had, for a small in the middle of nowhere location, Floyd is actually starting to get kind of a semi-large Latino population because when I was a kid, we had a lot of Christmas trees in our area, and a lot of agricultural workers headed up to our area to work on the Christmas tree farms and stayed and had families and such. So compared to what the school looked like when I was there to what it looks now, there's definitely a larger Latino population, but still really small and still very, very white.
Right.
But I went to Virginia Tech for my undergrad, and it's a small college town, but it's like a little mecca in the middle of nowhere. Lots of Asians, all kinds, Indian, Chinese, lots of Koreans, Japanese. So it was like the first time that I wasn't the Asian person in the class and felt like I could actually blend in to a certain extent instead of being the person of color that was doing whatever.
Right. Because you're noticeably Asian to me. And I assume to that very white town, you were probably noticeably Asian. I might look at you and be like, I wonder if she's mixed, but like a white person who's never been anywhere would probably only see you as an Asian.
And I remember like one of the earliest memories I have in kindergarten is swinging on the swings. It was recess. What kindergartner doesn't love recess? I'm on the swings, swinging really high because, of course, that's what you're supposed to do, go as high as you can. And some kid down in the playground yells out like, wow, look how high that Chinese girl is. I'm like, I'm not even Chinese.
I don't understand why it's so difficult to tell us apart. I understand I have an unfair advantage, but we look so different to me. I don't understand why we are always Chinese.
So it was definitely a weird kind of experience growing up. And as far as kind of understanding and interacting with my ethnicity, it's been a kind of long personal journey with a love-hate relationship of trying to see who I am, understand who I am, but also see and understand what the world sees when they see me and how their interpretation of what they see affects their interaction with me. That sounds somewhat convoluted, but
well, something that I think is pretty unique to the mixed Japanese experience that other mixed Asians probably don't, because other Asians do tend to stay within community a lot better than we do. You know, there are some places that are Japanese spaces. Like I live in a district here in LA that is Japanese, and there are 2 here, but most of the time there aren't very large Japanese communities, and we don't keep our language. We don't necessarily teach our language, things like that. The biggest touchstone is usually like a Buddhist temple that is nearby where you go to for all the Japanese events throughout the year. And that's kind of the extent of access, I think, for us compared to a lot of the other Asian people who like stay in community, keep language, have school, things like that. So I think what's really unique about our Asian experience is that we could literally, like you, maneuver through the world with our Japanese faces, and people are seeing us as Japanese, but because our culture has not carried through our upbringing, we're somehow representing something we have little or no access to. And we're going to be the representative of that to these other people, regardless of what we do.
Yes. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I definitely have, particularly being in a very white community and a very white area, or just even in an area that's very void of Asian people in general. It's like I may be the only Asian person they've met before, or they've not really experienced any other interactions. And I feel like I have to be perfect, be very helpful, be the best person I can be, because they're going to judge all of us by their one limited experience with me, which is very heavy.
It's too heavy, and you don't deserve that weight. Like you don't. These are moments where like I find that I will use humor that is stereotypical, like to deflect from the pain of something like that very heavy weight. I'll be like, I know I got thick Japanese calves, but I can't carry that weight. That's my knee-jerk reaction to a feeling like that, of the responsibility that lays on us as mixed Asians if we're in communities where people aren't used to us. But as Japanese mixed people, it is a struggle to connect, because it's already a very, I don't want to say closed off in a necessarily negative way, but it's a very like tight, keep it on the island
kind of culture. So to come here and to try to share it, it's like, we don't want them to know what we're like, you know? And so to the degree that even us,
it's like, you don't talk about family outside of family.
you don't. Yeah. I mean, you barely talk about family in family. I had two great aunts. Yeah. Like I had two great aunts who had stage 3 cancer and didn't tell anybody until they were in remission. And like a year later, and it was like, oh yeah, I had cancer. I'm fine. Well,
oh gosh.
You know, like that's how closed off Japanese are, that even within the own family. And I remember growing up, it was always like something happened. It was like, don't tell anybody in the family, you know, as it was, no one in my family besides my grandmother knew we were Black. You know, we didn't tell anybody until I was an adult. And I finally started telling my cousins. I was like, because they always asked, what's your dad? American. You know, whatever that meant, American. But they thought we were so brown. They thought we were Mexican because they couldn't fathom the idea that we would be Black. Like, and we don't super duper look like Black people know I'm Black, but Japanese people don't know I'm Japanese. So how are they going to know I'm Black? You know? So yeah, like I think it's a unique thing that we go through. And for someone like you who had, I think probably specifically because your family comes from the internment era, the protection of like, let's not do to our future generation. Let's not give white people in power an excuse to do to our future grandkids, you know, what they did to us.
I have a little story on that one too. Like, so just growing up in general, like I knew I was Japanese, but didn't really know, like it had no meaning other than I'm Japanese. It didn't have any cultural implications, really, other than the occasional Asian dish, but really it wasn't necessarily ethnically Japanese or anything like that.
Right.
But I was aware from a very young age, and I can't remember what age, that the Japanese internment was a thing during World War II. That was something that my mother did feel was important that I know. I'm not sure if my other siblings took that quite to heart as much as I did. And I don't know if she's told them this story either. But she found out in a very uncomfortable way. And I guess having this conversation too, you could also interpret it as a very Japanese way of finding out. She didn't know about the Japanese internment until she was in college and took a history class. Yeah. She found out in history class on a college campus that this happened. She didn't find out from her parents. And like she said, the first thing she basically did was go home and ask them about it.
Yeah.
He borderline refused to even talk to her about it. But she was just completely floored. And I think that really, really shook her to an extent that that is really hard to translate.
Right. My grandmother, she was little during the World War II. So she didn't know why the Americans came. Why were they here? They didn't know about Pearl Harbor. They didn't know about the war specifically they didn't know why the Americans attacked, basically. They had no idea that Japan had bombed the States in any way, shape, or form. So, and it wasn't until she was an adult when she married an American, came to America, and found out about Pearl Harbor. And she made me take her to go see that terrible movie with Ben Affleck. And I was like, Grandma, I don't want to go. Like, I was like, I don't want to go see this movie. I definitely don't want to go see this movie with you. Like, I already don't want to go. And she's like, I need to learn. I'm like, you're not going to learn. So the whole movie was me saying that part didn't happen. That's not how that went. And then I had to afterwards, like, tell her what I learned in school versus what she saw in the movie. But exactly like that. Like, they don't talk about it. So how are they going to know why their family is the way that they are?
Yeah. And, I guess for me personally, and I'll dive in a little bit more about myself. So it's been interesting as an adult trying to go through and kind of pick apart sections of my life to understand myself better, to understand my parents better, and to kind of understand like who I am, why I am, and if something is bothering me, better understand it so I can either like embrace or reject those feelings that I have that are triggering negative connotations. And so I have gone to therapy. I'll just throw that out there.
We're a pro therapy podcast here.
Yes, woo. I went to cognitive processing therapy, which is awesome. It's all about thought process and really being more analytical about what's going on instead of emotional. So you can think about things more kind of like holistically and balanced instead of just having that knee-jerk emotional reaction, which is a problem frequently for people who have been in an abusive situation, relationship, childhood, etc. With that being said, my father was kind of crazy. He was a very special, unique individual. A white, redheaded, Polish Catholic boy that I guess he grew up Vatican II, maybe. He went to Catholic school. He had red hair and he was a lefty. And had ADHD and was dyslexic, I'm sure. The nuns loved him by beating him. So, and he also had a very rough childhood with abuse as well. Not saying that that's an excuse, but as me understanding him as a person and kind of like where he was coming from and how that translated down to us. As far as I know, he never really sought any kind of psychiatric help, but through, trying to understand what was going on with me, with our relationship, that he has all of the keynotes of having had narcissistic personality disorder, just like everything negative is kind of happening to him. It's a conspiracy. People are against him. I don't do anything wrong. And literally being able to recreate a chain of events in his head, in his own image, even if we can prove that that's not what happens, but he legitimately would believe it. Not saying that that's an excuse, but just kind of like understanding how that translated to his child rearing skills.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Were subpar. So I am a child of his third marriage. So I have two much older half sisters that are very white. So they're, I think they're around 15 years older than my brother and maybe around 18 years older than I am, give or take. So a big age gap. My dad was much older than my mom. And part of my dad died when I was 26. And it was definitely a very rough period. I was, for my last year of grad school, I was also his caretaker while writing my thesis, while doing my work for my thesis show. And it was a difficult period. And I ended up leaving too because I needed to do that for myself. Because that wasn't a situation that I had asked for. It was a situation that he had put himself into. And part of me was needing to understand that. But anyway, he passed around a year after I moved out. He had numerous health conditions and honestly did not take very good care of himself, which again was his responsibility and not mine. But my half-sisters came down like on his deathbed. And after he died, we were going back up to the house to like try to clean and purge. My dad was a pack rat and kind of like crazy on multiple levels, like conspiracy theorists. So Y2K, Y2K didn't happen. So the world is having its biblical end. We have to be ready. So all things considered, I feel like I turned out like a pretty normal human being. But part of the drive, like my half sisters are Canadian. They were born in the US, but they have Canadian citizenship now and they live in Canada, and they flew down all the way down here. And so they didn't have a car. So we were driving back and forth, and awkward situation. We were trying to bond because, long story short, my dad, of course, was not a family building character. So he had put decisive actions kind of between family. So we did not have really a previous relationship with our sisters. But they wanted to try to mend some bridges, build bridges. And I don't remember which one of them said it, and it may have also been kind of like nervous conversation at that point too, because I mean, our father had just died. We're trying to figure out what in the world's going on. And one of them said that when he met my mother, they were up in Canada, and at that point in his life, he decided that he wanted to follow a new path and go to chiropractic school, and found one down in Georgia. And had started dating my mom. I'm not sure how long before that. And so he like took them aside somehow. They were, I guess, around 15 or so, and was like, it's time for me to start a new section of my life, which is also a very bizarre thing you say to your child.
I've heard those words from my parents. It is terrible.
And like, it's time for me to start a new part of my life. And basically saying that he was going to be with my mother, and brought up that she was Japanese, and that if he was ever unhappy with her, he could just send her home.
Wow.
And so it's just like, what? This is just, I definitely wasn't exactly appreciative of that time. And I don't fault them for that. It was a very weird period for both of us. I probably would have preferred having the news in a different context, but that definitely has kind of opened my eyes to a certain extent to kind of see who he was and how he viewed my mother. And in kind of a degree of how he might have viewed me as well. Like, I wasn't really necessarily a person. Right. I was more an extension of him than an individual. And my mom was kind of his property to a certain extent, I think. And like, honestly, trying to sit down and puzzle that was very difficult, because it's trying to be objective within a very emotional, very personal part of who I am.
Yeah, that I don't want to like make too much of a blanket statement about that feeling very typical. And yet my white grandfather marrying a Japanese wife, and all his friends doing it as well, including his best friend married my grandmother's sister. And like, that these were white men who did kind of treat their Japanese brides as domestics.
You're my wife, but you're kind of my servant at the same time.
That's the vibe that I would say I felt in the white men that were married into my Japanese family. And even to the degree of like, my grandfather actually had another family. He had a German family simultaneously with my Japanese family, which we didn't know about until afterwards. But there's like a son that's like between the ages of my mom and her younger sister. And so like, clearly,
and looks just like him, but that's a different thing. To try to deny, like, oh no, this is a new thing. It's like, okay, that guy looks just like you. But that idea of just like one of them was the real one. Like he was legally married to my grandmother, but like they had a house, they had a family, they had a life. Like this thing of just like, it's fine because I might be reaching, but it's the way that I felt given the circumstance of this idea of just like, if they were legitimate, I wouldn't have this other family. Like I wouldn't need this other family, but he has his white family and then he had his Japanese family. I think that is a thing. I don't, like I said, I don't want to be too blanket about it, but just because I saw it in my own family too, and hearing your story, like everything you were saying, I was just like, yeah, I believe 100% that is how that felt for him, even not knowing him. Like it just seems like, is that a product of the time? Is that this dehumanizing thing of like people that are different from you? Like, don't know, but it feels.
Yeah, definitely on more than one occasion. I remember him also ranting about immigrants at the table. And it's just like, but you married one.
But also, isn't he a Canadian? And he's in America?
No, he is American.
Oh, he is an American. Okay.
From Detroit.
Okay.
So, yeah. So with all of that being said, it's been kind of an interesting journey trying to figure out, it's like, is this part of the narcissism?
Right.
Or is this part of maybe the Japanese self-repression? Is this a combination
of
all of this? Like talking, I have one, he's Taiwanese, but he is now an American citizen and he's lived most of his life over in the US, but still like there's definitely a disconnect between his understanding of American culture, but he also still understands his home culture very well and has kind of a more open view of it. And I think that's one benefit, I guess you could say, of being biracial. Sometimes you don't feel like you entirely, or at least I don't feel like I entirely have my skin in the game the same way as maybe people of full descent do. Sure. So I feel that I can look at it a little bit more objectively because I don't feel necessarily as tied to some of these, say, same cultural values.
Right. That's a tough one though, because like the reason you don't have those ties is really just about access. And if you had more access, your whole identity would be different. And coming from a culture like Japanese culture, where they are so tight about it, especially when they go to other places, where I think it's probably the same for both mixed Japanese and also for like Japanese born, American born Japanese, of this thing of just like, we're kind of orphans to this thing that we clearly are a reflection of because it's like it's in us and everything like that. But we're almost complete strangers to it. And the way that we have to try to find access and connection, you said, you feel like you may not have skin in the game. You wonder what would be that thing that would make you get there? And do you feel like, is it too late? Could you try? What are the things you could do? Like, there's a lot of feelings that I think are connected to that too.
Yeah. I've definitely tried making connections and it's been hard on multiple levels because access, of course, is one. There really aren't, to my knowledge, aren't a whole bunch of specifically Japanese people in the area.
Yeah.
And also because of my upbringing and basically part of how my dad made sure we were isolated so he could keep in control of us.
Yeah.
Put a permanent wedge between like me and my family and access to his family, but also my mom's family.
Right.
Like I saw my grandparents, granted, I mean, they were Canadian and they had a long way to travel.
Sure.
But I only saw my grandparents like maybe 5 or 6 times, maybe. And my grandmother died my freshman year of college, and my grandfather died after I finished grad school. But still, there was like no relationship because my dad literally made it difficult. And with maybe not specifically saying it with words, but making it very clear with actions that they were not welcome, that it was his house. And so it was not comfortable for them to be there either.
Yeah.
And so I know.
What a bizarre way that the people that have this, because it's in my family too, of just like, you married this person, but there's no embracing of who they actually are or where they come from.
Yeah.
So bizarre.
Yeah. It's like I see you as an object, and maybe some of it is also due to the like super hyper sexualization of Asian women.
Yeah.
I can't say for sure in my situation, but it's definitely been a weird, bumpy ride.
Right. I've heard it too. Like there's been people who have straight up asked me the question, like, am I a proper Japanese wife? And I'm like, what the hell do you think that means? Like, what do you think that means? Because,
we need some inappropriate language right here flying out of her mouth.
Yeah, just like, what is happening? Yeah, there's this weird, I think there is something to that. I think it's clear. I mean, one of the biggest things that it seems clear to me, and I think this would cross almost any mixed interracial relationship of some sort, is the willingness to learn a language. It was very clear that it was my grandmother's responsibility to learn English and speak it exclusively. But it was never the case that my grandfather or any of my white uncles, who married Japanese women, were required to learn Japanese. They may know a couple little phrases that they thought were cute or whatever, but that wasn't the family unit as an interracial family wasn't a thing. It was a white culture that just happened to have these, I mean, they were literally called the Yellow Brides. So like going back to the idea of when that word was used, it was a white culture with these Yellow Brides.
Yeah. And I could be wrong because again, it's not me, it's some others that I've interacted with. I think definitely there was a huge culture kill during the internments.
Sure, absolutely.
And you're talking about it happening too with the war bride period. I think when you're starting to get post that and people are immigrating, more recent immigrants are far more likely to be taking their kids to Japanese school on the weekends, I think.
I agree.
Than say our generation's family would have been.
I'm so jealous because I live really close to, like I said, one of the smaller of the two Japanese communities here in LA. And there's like Japanese school. And I was like, oh, Japanese school, I'm going to sign up. And it's only until 12 years old. And I'm like, oh, crap. So I can't even like try to go back to embrace some of that older cultural things, which I actually had a decent amount of access to when I was little, except for language. But I'm so jealous of these kids. Like to be that jealous of like a 5-year-old who is probably really upset that they have to go to Japanese school on the weekend. But for me,
that you can do what you want.
I know, yeah. But I'm just like, I want to be like you, kid. Just in terms of like certain mannerisms and things that like, there's some stuff that made it in there just through observation and like living with my grandmother and things. But that absence, I definitely feel that orphan status to. I was about to say the words real Japanese. But that's exactly how like it feels like that. Living in the community that I live in and trying to get like little doses of access to Japaneseness, and only little things trickle out of me because I only had so much access. There's like pain in it. Like I feel that absence. Do you feel that? Gosh, it's tough because I know generally where you're at and how little of access there is to Japanese heritage. Do you
feel a loss of it? Where do you sit?
Yes, like kind of an emptiness. Like, I'll say like reference the group that we just met in. So for me, that's literally been an access point.
Right.
Because I grew up in a house, like, again, just very, very weird, non-traditional upbringing. Apparently my mother did not learn how to cook until she married my dad, which sounds kind of crazy. So it wasn't like her parents were even teaching her how to prepare any of the dishes that she may have grown up with. So I don't even really know how, say, ethnic her kitchen was compared to what we grew up with. But we also didn't have access to those things in our community.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been able to go get like nishiki rice or anything like that.
What is that? So there's definitely kind of feeling like I'm missing something. And then being part of this group, I've been able to pick up on some cooking, which has been very helpful. But even like sharing some posts, like I did this, I did XYZ in my garden, and people are throwing out like one or two or short little Japanese phrases. And I'm like, I gotta Google no clue what the heck that is. I'm going to try to Google that right now. And sometimes it's definitely a kind of up and interpretation. It's like it could kind of swing either way, whether this was a good or a bad connotation.
Yeah. There's a lot of Japanese phrases teeter that line of if it's said really politely, it's a negative, and if it's said more kind of just like this is it, then it's not too bad. Yeah, there's of what I have access to. Like I took Japanese in school and things. My Japanese is terrible. I'm more of a mimic than actually comfortable. So like I will mimic my grandmother's Japanese, which means I sound like an old lady when I speak to Japanese people. But yeah, there's a lot of phrases like that. And I appreciate that you've, like me, sought out a space to try to have some kind of connection. And I've learned things too that I didn't have. I probably had a little bit more access, but I've learned things that didn't come up in my family. So things like that are helpful. It's disturbing because of the vast age discrepancy in that group of where some things, sometimes the older folks will post something and I'm like, oh my gosh, because that wouldn't fly right now. Like, but in that small group, it's not so bad. Sometimes it's not so bad. Sometimes it's just cute, but there are times. And I think the responses under the post that you did, some of it was really revealing in terms of just there is a difference between us.
Yeah. And part of the journey for me too has been personally, I consider when I'm thinking of myself and other people, I'm feeling inclusive when it comes to other people of color, because a lot of us, no matter what our skin tone is, we've had some similar experiences here and there, even if it is just like feeling uncomfortable that we're the only person in a room.
Absolutely.
I got to do diversity training once, and I was the only person of color besides the person giving the training in the room. And it's like, are we good here?
Yeah.
I think we're good here.
Yeah, that's been there too. It sucks.
But yeah, one thing that has been really eye-opening for me is, again, in that group, is understanding oneself in relation to others. Like we're not just a single individual that has zero impact or interaction with others. It's a collective, and how we deal with other people is kind of a reflection. And I was just kind of surprised at the number of people that have kind of, I guess for a lack of better terminology that I can think of right now, is almost kind of a self-whitewashing to where it's...
I think that's fair.
Where they thought morality-wise, even when it comes to discrimination, align themselves with, say, the whiter line, opposed to with their brothers in the people of color spectrum, and also kind of identify them as an otherness rather than as of an equal self.
Right.
And that's definitely been a little hard for me to grasp as a person. I'm like, yes, but we're all individuals. We all have different experiences, and their experiences have led them here rather than there.
And when you're kind of craving that connection of what you was absent to you, and you see people dismissing it voluntarily, it's just like, just like, I want this though. How are you dismissing it so easily? I think that can be a little bit tough. We are coming to the end though. So before we wrap up, one thing that I do like to do is, we talk about trauma sometimes, we talk about difficulties and just general discomfort as mixed people, not always finding a special place. But I do like to end the show by asking my guests, what do you love most about being a mixed person?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I guess it's by having been forced by the white community around me to see myself as different. It's made me, as a personal choice, look into exploring my own cultural heritage more, and not only myself, but trying to understand where other cultures are coming from and what some of those other cultural norms are, instead of always just trying to impose what I think is normal onto other people.
Yeah. Well, once you are a guest on Militantly Mixed, you become part of the Militantly Mixed family. So you are now a cousin, or since we're both Japanese, itoko. So you can always feel like you have a family to connect with here, in terms of your mixedness. Before we get out of here, do you want to share how people can connect with you if they want?
Sure. I'm an artist. Woo! So you can find me on Instagram. I'm Sidra K. That's SIDRAK.art. And for Facebook, it's sidrak.art//.
All right. So we'll put that in the show notes so that people can support our new cousin in your art endeavor and everything like that. And I want to thank you for jumping on with me. I know that when I saw your post, I try not to do too much self-promotion on that group because I don't think that that's like the mission of that group, but it was an opportunity to connect with another mixed person, because I don't always think that that's where I'm going to find mixed folks necessarily, and get a chance to have this conversation. So I do appreciate you jumping on with me and doing that. And just know that whenever you do feel like you don't have that sense of your mixed Japanese community, that you have somebody over here in California to be a support. Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Charmaine Fury. Music is by David Bogan the One. You can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Militantly Mixed. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Militantly Mixed, please go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for monthly sponsorship, or paypal.me/militantlymixed for a one-time only donation. And if you like what you hear on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to be your mixed-ass self. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.